James Rink's Lone Wolf. Alpha Squad copy over. Chapter 1. Don't talk. For those who don't know me, I am the kind of person that likes to keep myself busy in order to avoid thinking about my past. Looking back at my experiences, I don't view them as ruining my life, but instead as events that showed me what not to become myself. This is the childhood I choose to remember. I was born in 1980 and spent my childhood in Charlotte, North Carolina. Most of my early years were pure misery. Between an arrogant and selfish mother and passive-aggressive father, I was pretty much molded into a basket case. Emotionally, I was ultra-sensitive from the onslaught of aggression my parents put me through. My mother would be characterized as a moody person, but not in a bipolar way. If you did everything the way she wanted, then she loved you. But if you had your own ideas conflicted hers, that would be problematic. I remember being punished for playing with our family dog too loudly or for asking her a question while she was on the phone. It was little things like that that put me under the wrath of her wooden spoon and a corresponding timeout. Since I could never understand what would make her angry, I spent most of my childhood in a submissive, disassociative state. Her lack of maternal instincts was reflected in her form of tough love, as she liked to put it. Her version of love never made any sense. At one point, she would buy me toys and tell me she loved me. She would then turn around and take them away from me because I accidentally touched her. The good news is that she wasn't around much for most of my childhood, just a few hours a day. After I came home from school, she would go out for special events around town, volunteering her time as an usher in exchange for tickets to concerts and shows. Being alone and unloved was hard enough as it is, but things got a lot worse as her love and hate towards me was reinforced by my father. Whenever I got Mom mad, which was pretty much all the time, she would send my father into a frenzy, causing him to physically beat me. In my early teen years, this physical violence towards me increased as puberty began altering the way I viewed the reality that was designed for me. I was tired of their flavor of tough love and just wanted to have friends and date like other boys, but I couldn't for some reason. From the age of 10 to the age of 20, I had no friends at all. None of the other kids wanted to hang out with me. They would try to be my friends, but I would just zone out and get moody from all the PTSD I was going through. That's post-traumatic stress disorder for those who don't know. As a young teen, no one wanted to sit next to me at lunch hour because I was so embarrassed to sit alone every day. I decided not to eat lunch at all. None of the teachers or school staff seemed to question why I was not eating lunch every day. Either they didn't care, which I don't think is the case, or they were just too overwhelmed with a broken education system to get involved in my life. My rebellious eating habits eventually morphed into anorexia. I just stopped eating altogether. I thought if I would stop eating, then I could get sick, and anyone, would finally try to help me. But I never seemed to be able to go as far as starving myself and still ate dinner. So no one helped. And sadly, my height was stunted from this. By the time I was 20, I was just under 5'1". Around my 14th birthday, I decided if no one was going to help me, I would have to help myself. So I began to assert my independence by becoming rebellious. But my form of rebellion was quite different than my sister's, who elected to run away from home over and over. See, my sister, who was 5 years older than me, had to deal with the same crap. But in my 10-year-old mind, I decided that fighting back and running away would make me a bad person. So instead of running away, I would confront my father and tell him he was abusive and a bad person. Of course, this didn't really settle very well with him, as his response was, "You are the child and I am the parent. You do as I say." I said, "Act like a real father and I will." Then he lunged his fist at me. My dad was much bigger than me, and I was weak and sickly from malnourishment. He pinned me down under the weight of his body until I blacked out. I vaguely remember hearing my sister walk into my bedroom and yell at my dad, "Get off of him! He's seizuring!" These fights happened more than once. They were triggered over the most mundane things, such as the time I said, "Stop humming, you're annoying me." That day he hit my head against a wall. Then he said, "I love you, James. I do this because I love you." For an 18-month period when I was around the age of 14, these arguments would occur for nearly 2 to 3 hours every day. And they almost always happened in the evening when my mother was out having a good time. After being pinned down in those fights, I remember yelling constantly at my father to get off me. I did this in the vain hope that my neighbors would call the cops on my family. But I guess I didn't scream loud enough. No one on my street did anything to help me. Maybe they didn't hear me, or maybe they didn't want to hear what was going on in my home. I really don't know. But the screaming matches would go on until I exhausted myself. Due to the extreme amounts of yelling, I ended up scorching my vocal cords. Since it happened right around the age of 14, my voice never developed properly during puberty. If I talked for more than 5 minutes a day, my throat would burn, and the sound that came out was one of a 12-year-old boy. It wasn't until I was 25 that I was able to get help for this problem and slowly heal myself. As hard as it was going through my teen years without any friends, having a childlike voice put me on the receiving end of my classmates' hazing. On top of all the other problems I was facing, the kids would trigger severe anxiety attacks. That put me on a slippery slope to full-blown obsessive-compulsive disorder. OCD occurs when your mind gets stuck on certain ideas and ruminations. Since no one seemed to care that I couldn't really talk and I was weak and anorexic, I decided I would show people I needed help by wearing the same clothes every day to school and church. This wasn't really a big issue for me. I was already suffering from wardrobe neuroses. My parents only allowed me 2 to 3 sets of clothing throughout much of my childhood. In many third world nations, this would seem normal, but my parents weren't poor by any means. My father used to work for the Mellon family in Greenwich, Connecticut. They even owned real estate there at one time. Growing up in the 1980s, I remember my father buying me a $20 pair of jeans, which was comfortable and decent looking. But my mother thought it was too expensive and would take them back to the store. Most of the time, my mom wouldn't bother getting a replacement. If she did, she would buy me the ugliest pair of acid wash, $15 clearance jeans no one wanted to wear. And of course, my peers would make fun of how I looked. This kind of twisted thinking programmed my mind to never be at peace. I would always worry they would take the things I loved away from me. And they did the neurotic clothing routine to me throughout my growing up. I got to the point where it was pointless to ask them for new clothes. My mother was actually a clothing freak. We had 5 closets in our home, including a walk-in closet, which was dedicated to all her dresses and shoes. In my bedroom, I had 2 closets, one of which contained all her clothes. In my other closet, she only allotted me a tiny space between her dresses to hang up my collared shirts because, according to her, I didn't really have much to wear anyway, so I didn't need the space. When I got older, I tried throwing all her stuff out of my closet into the hallway. This, of course, resulted in huge fights with her and a physical intervention by my father. He would restrain. Meanwhile, my mother would put all of her clothes back in my room. It was at this point I decided to stop wearing different clothes every day. I picked my favorite shirt and pants, and for many months I would wear them all the time until they developed holes, and then I would sew them together and wear them even more. Of course, my classmates would complain about my hygiene, but no adult authority seemed to really care. Both my parents could clearly see I was wearing the same thing every day, but I guess they didn't want to interfere because it's a lot easier to look the other way than to actually go out and buy new clothes. It took a lot of work to kick that ritual, which I wasn't able to do until long after I left home and sought a therapist. My father was a conservative Christian fundamentalist. You would even say a good Christian. At least he thought so. He took me to church every Sunday, which is normal for most people in the North Carolina Bible Belt. But just like in school, I never seemed to fit into any church cliques. I was so embarrassed having no friends at all that I would find an empty room and hide out with a book in the closet until church services were over. That was less painful to deal with than having to go through the humiliation of having no one to talk to. 3:24 p.m. Besides, anything was better than being around so-called Christians. My hiding routine went on for quite some time until some old church deacon found me. The poor man probably thought I was a bum breaking and entering. By that time, I was wearing that nasty, worn-out outfit every day. I don't remember what excuse I made, but he let me go on as long as I allowed him to personally escort me back into the main sanctuary for more Christian indoctrination. By this time, Mom wasn't going to church anymore, and I stopped sitting with my dad because there was this other couple who sort of semi-adopted me and showed me love and allowed me to sit with them. Well, when I got to be 13, I sort of stopped being friends with their kid and I disappeared, which is easy to do because I went to one of those mega churches where most people don't really know anyone else. I tried all my favorite hiding spots, but the old deacon seemed to find me. So instead of ditching church, I would take strolls in the surrounding neighborhood. That continued until the church security patrol scared me out of it. So I decided it was best to return back to my regular Sunday indoctrination sessions and pretend that I was in love with religion and my Christian family. But my hiding routine wasn't just limited to church indoctrination. When I was 10 years old, my mom became fascinated with stories of UFOs and the Greys. She would watch videos of alien abductions, which triggered so much anxiety that I would hide under my bed at night. Now, don't get me wrong, I've never consciously seen a gray in my bedroom as a child, but sometimes I could see images of them in my mind. They would sometimes communicate to me on an emotional level. I was told that if I ever talked, it would kill me on my 12th birthday. This didn't happen, of course, but it scared me so much I never told anyone until now. My only escape throughout my childhood was Boy Scouts, which I loved. I even made it to Eagle Scout. I didn't have to worry about the stigma of my clothing neuroses because we all wore uniforms. The time I was away from my parents meant a few days a month where I could have some peace. Instead of having to explain away my speech problems, I found it easier to lie about my age and pretty much hang out around the younger kids. They didn't judge me as much as my own age group did. By the time I finished the 8th grade, I was a mess. I was suffering from a speech impediment, depression, OCD, clothing rituals, and anxiety. I could barely go outside in the public. The slightest innuendos from strangers would trigger my PTSD. At this point, going into the military was one option. They seemed desperate to get me to join. After a few months or so, a recruiter would give me a call trying to entice me into the benefits of a military life. But because of my poor health, I figured it was best to do my own thing, so off to college I went. Mom and Dad were finally relieved to be free of their parenting chores at the age of 20, away from home at last. I did my best to juggle a college life track, grades, and my luggage from the past. Come August 2000, the stress of all of this began to mount. Every time I would try to sleep, I would feel chills and air movement around me while lying in bed, and sometimes I would sense something in my room watching me, and it caused me to wake up every hour or so in the night, which led to persistent insomnia problem, which still lingers to this day. In the midst of these sleep disturbances, I began to experience sleep paralysis episodes. This occurs when your brain waves are still in a deep dreaming pattern. When you're in this mindset, normally your body is paralyzed to keep you from injuring yourself while sleeping. But when your sleeping patterns go out of balance like mine were at that time, it is possible to open your eyes while you're still dreaming and see into the spirit realm around you. This is a frightening experience, especially if you experience the paralysis that comes with it. Once, I saw some weird-looking black being with red eyes, a demon in my bedroom. Naturally, my sleeping problems and they steadily got worse. Then one early morning in September of 2000, I woke up, and at the foot of my bed was an angel of light. This being had a beautiful golden aura which flooded my room with its love and wisdom. In this vision, the entity appeared to be about 3 feet high. He wore long, flowing white robes. His skin was of a white complexion, and his hair was long and brown. In his left hand, he was holding a golden torch that burnt blood. In his right hand, he held the sign of the Trinity. Thy word is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path. Psalm 119, 105. Since this was the first angelic vision I had ever had, I thought I was going mad. Then he vanished. Later, I came to understand this was a visit from Archangel Michael. 2 weeks later, I had a vision of Jesus on the cross. His head was hanging down from severe pain of the crucifixion. He gathered his strength and rolled his head up and looked at me. Then I returned to the present. Other than the bizarre nature of these hallucinations, I assumed these were signs from God that I was in need of professional help, which later was something I wish I had never sought. When the psychiatrist asked me to describe my childhood problems, I was at a loss because there were so many years which I could not recall. Birthday parties, going to a church as a kid, or playing with my sister. I have no memories of when I was 6, 7, or 8 years old. I remember only a little up to the age of 10. I thought everyone was like this. The psychiatrist diagnosed me with dissociative amnesia and said my memory problems were due to all the crap from my childhood. Many years later, I had Dr. Bill Deagle do a clairvoyant reading on me, and he saw my memory problems were a result of a traumatic brain injury in my operculum, left temporal lobe, which controls word finding and sequencing. You may notice that I sometimes slur words from time to time. Well, I got a good excuse. Between the amnesia and traumatic brain injury, a lot of things don't make sense. My problems were not limited to just memory recall. I was also suffering from a bizarre psychosomatic pain in my genitals. I say it's bizarre because the doctors have no clue why it's happening. If I get an erection, I will suffer from a burning sensation for hours, and if I have an orgasm, I suffer from severe needle-like pains in the the same place all day long, and they get progressively worse and worse until I sleep it off the next night. Ow. I have tried taking painkillers to knock out the pain, but nothing makes it go away, even if I keep popping more pills. I wish I could say something positive here, but I still haven't found a way to fix this problem yet. I really don't know what is causing it. The good news is the pain has been slowly decreasing over the years, and for the most part, it's something I can manage with the help of a blood pressure medicine, which pretty much serves as a chemical chastity belt. Of course, it doesn't always work, and on those days, I just shut down and stay bedridden. So the doctors narrowed down my conditions to OCD, depression, and ADHD, and put me on a medication protocol. Under the influence of the Paxil, the quality of my life began to diminish. I became even more depressed. I was sleeping nearly 16 hours a day, and I had these terrible shakes. I don't know why this product is on the market. It didn't work for me. In fact, it did the opposite. Later, I found out that Paxil was in the middle of a lawsuit for increasing the rate of suicide deaths in children. How ironic. An antidepressant that increases suicide. Surely the FDA must know how dangerous these products are. After discontinuing Paxil, I began switching from medication to medication, which seemed to end in the same result: more depression and fatigue. My doctors kept telling me the same thing. You need to find the right one that works for you. Altogether, I tried 26 different medications. Some of them made me severely depressed, like Luvox, one antidepressant, Ramiraran, sedated me for 22 hours. Desperate to try anything, I decided to take a more unorthodox approach. In 2003, I did 15 sessions of biofeedback. What they do is basically place electrodes on your head to read your brain's EEG, electrical activity. This information is then fed into a computer program which interfaces with your brain, allowing the user to retain their brainwave patterns by simply moving an object around on a computer screen. After a few sessions, the practitioner eventually settled on a PTSD protocol. Sadly, I never received the benefit I was promised. But it was odd. He told me I was the only patient that had received no benefits from biofeedback. It was like a wall was blocking my recovery. The pain of my anxiety and depression continued to deepen, but by my early 20s, I started sleeping in my apartment's walk-in closet. At least there I felt safe, but my health was falling apart. The bad reactions I was having to the medications began to push my body overboard. I started developing horrible allergic reactions to almost everything I ate. To reduce the pain I was in all the time, I would split my pills, reducing my dosage. But my doctor really frowned upon that. He insisted I was getting sick because I was violating the integrity of the pills, and demanded that I continue the full dosage. At that time, I really didn't know any better. The American Medical Association and its counterpart, the FDA, know full well these pills don't cure anything, but only treat conditions. These medications simply don't work. They only serve to cover up the underlying symptoms of a deeper systemic problem. I had to learn the hard way that conventional doctors are not trained to recognize our mind, body, spirit connection, but instead serve as agents of evil for the pharmaceutical companies and the government which allows them to peddle their poisons. I was now going down a slippery slope into a full-blown autoimmune disorder. This means my body was having trouble recognizing the particles that are good and bad. So instead, would just attack everything. Because I was so out of balance in so many areas of my life, and because I was holding so many traumatic memories in my lower chakra system, my gut was no longer digesting food properly. I was severely bloated, overweight, and in pain from the allergies and a leaky gut condition from a severe candida yeast infection in my GI tract. At this low point in my life, I took the initiative to empower myself to become healthy again. Using natural herbs and vitamins, I slowly began to wean myself off meds. The health benefits I got from these natural approaches were so much better than I had ever had from any medication. At that point, something clicked inside me. I was convinced there was a conspiracy in the American healthcare system. The pharmaceutical corporations and government were only interested in maximizing profits and have no interest in the welfare of the people they claim to serve. That's why doctors are not trained with knowledge of natural supplements and dietary knowledge. By the time I stopped using medication, I was still suffering from the neuroses of my childhood, but now I had chronic fatigue, a systemic yeast infection in my gut, severe ADHD made worse due to my long-term exposure to my pharmaceutical lobotomy, excessively cold feet in the wintertime, and I still had my speech impediment. I suffered from severe pain due to candida-related food allergies. As a result, food became unappetizing, and my weight soon dropped below 110 pounds. After giving up on conventional medicine in 2003, I gave myself an ultimatum. I would never believe what an expert says to be true unless I research it myself. I have slowly nursed myself back to health while educating and empowering myself. Looking back at this is painful to me. Even now, the memories remain scattered and shattered in my mind, and I don't like saying bad things about my family and those I love. If you love someone, is it right to be angry at their free will choice? Of course, I didn't mention the few times in my life where my parents tried to show me love, but even then I was always on the edge because I would never know when they would strike me down again. Sure, my parents were about as incompetent as you can get when it comes to raising children, but I also chose this life path before coming to this earth and recognized that trauma and pain can be transmuted into a higher purpose. There is no reason any of this should be able to stop me from healing and integrating, and that's what I plan to do. So the following is my story of how I went about integrating myself and those who helped me get to where I am. It was at this point that I met Nate. Chapter 2, page 20, continued at a later timeline. Lone Wolf, Alpha Squad, copy over, James Rink.